Hello, everyone. This is Maurizio Cascetta, and welcome to a new installment of the Legacy Conversation on the Legacy of John Williams podcast. This episode is also available as a video podcast on our YouTube channel. And here with me, my co-host and associate producer, Tim Burden. Hi, Tim. How you doing?
Yes. Hello, Maurizio. Great to be here with you and indeed with our esteemed guests, because we're talking about a project and a theme and a subject which is so passionate. A great interest for all of us.
Yeah, absolutely. And we are so happy to have here today to talk about the legacy of John Williams in terms of the presentation of his music in the concert hall. And to do so, we have here two very distinguished guests. The first is a true ambassador of film music, composer and conductor David Newman. Hi, Dave. Nice to see you, and welcome to the legacy of John Williams.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
Yeah. Welcome back.
Yeah, Dave was with us on a couple of other occasions in the past, and we are always very happy to have him on the show. And the second guest is another esteemed film music expert, film journalist Tim Graving, finally on the Legacy of John Williams podcast. Hi, Tim. Nice to have you.
Hello.
Yes, Tim. Good to.
Nice to be here. Nice to make my virginal debut.
No, it's so great to have you here because, in addition to being a very, profound connoisseur of film music, you are now working on the first biography of John Williams. So there's plenty to talk about on that front as well. But, first, we are here today, like I was saying, to discuss the legacy of John Williams in terms of film music in concert. And the jumping off point for this is the upcoming concert that is being performed by the LA Phil, conducted by David Newman at the Walt Disney Concert Hall on February 2, 3, and 4, that will feature a program called A Century of Film Music, a thrilling selection of film pieces by some of the finest composers who ever wrote music for the movies. The concert is part of a new series of the LA Phil called John Williams Spotlight, and it's curated by Maestro Williams himself. It's important to say this concert does not feature projections of film clips of any kind, as often is the case, but will be performed as pure music. So, Dave, I'd love to kick off the conversation with you, and because as we discussed on some of our previous conversations, we live now in an era where film music is more popular than ever in the concert hall. But that being said, it's not always easy to put together a program of film music like this one, and I'm sure it was quite a challenge to include some of the best film music written over the last 90 years without actually leaving out something important. The program looks varied and exciting enough to give an actual concrete sample of the incredible diversity and beauty that is found in film music. So for many years, film music was truly frowned upon or even ostracized by the classical musical elite, so to speak. So what were your reasons for putting together this program with the help of John Williams?
Well, this is really John's curated program, as you indicated. It's just one of 4 concerts. There's, I think, 3 films with live orchestra this year season. There's only this one. We did include some stuff that was a little bit off the radar. My brother Thomas Newman, we're going to do a piece of his that I don't think has ever been done. I'm really particular. I particularly love Alex North's score to Spartacus. I think it's a masterpiece in every sense of the word. We could argue about what that means, why, what is a film music masterpiece. But it is basically one of the scenes complete that where the music really does kind of tell the story of the slaves in the middle of their revolt marching on a certain place in Italy, and then it morphs into the end of the main title, which also is a very story cue with I think Saul Bass did the things, like at the end when the militaristic music goes up and down and up and down, and then it just kind of falls apart at the end with the cracking of the face, that's an interesting symbolic metaphoric concept of like, what is Alex North doing in the main title of Spartacus? What's he saying about it? What is the slave revolt? It's doomed, isn't it? It has a certain pathos, but it also has a certain joy. There would they rather be free as free men instead of slaves for a short amount of time, or live their whole life as slave, those kinds of concepts. And I think the music that Alex did on that is really profoundly tells that story with a I wouldn't say the surface is simple, but it's accessible and manageable. But underneath it, the rise and fall, like the rise and fall of the emotions and the rise and fall of the fortunes of the slave revolt, all that is wrapped in. So I've only done the main title of Spartacus in the 80s, like late 80s at a Sundance Hunter. So I was really thrilled to do that, and there are a couple of others, but this is John's sense. We're starting with Captain Blood, which I think is 1935, and then the farthest we go is Tom's piece, which is I think 2017. Is that right? 17, 18, something like that. Yeah. And we have. Yeah, we have some, we have we have some other stuff in between, and et cetera, et cetera. So,
yes, it seems to me that the program is very exciting. I even created a playlist on Spotify that is for all of you to check. I'll put a link in the description. And it seems to me that the first half of the program is centered around the more golden age of Hollywood from the 1930s to the early 60s, with music by Korngold and Alfred Newman and Bernard Herrmann, Franz Waxman, Miklos Rozsa, Alex North, Maurice Jarre. And while the second half instead goes from this 1970s or late 60s, early 70s to the more recent years, with selections by Jerry Goldsmith, Ennio Morricone, Nino Rota, Alan Silvestri, Thomas Newman, Danny Elfman, and of course John Williams. So was the program constructed as a sort of, to give a contrast between pieces, or it was more a journey through, several decades of film music?
I again, we went back. I did do a couple of drafts of programs. There's just, like you said, there's so much to choose from. There's so much important film music that isn't on it because there's just too much to do. So I think we wanted something from the 30s, the 40s, the 50s, each decade. But it, we're on the edge of it being too long for one concert as it is. And you can, of course, there's, as you know, there's tons that's left out that could be in there. I'm very glad that we're doing Captain Blood, which I wasn't as familiar with. I've done Robin Hood a bunch of times, but Captain Blood's the first thing really that Korngold does. And I just didn't, it's a really good score. I love Robin Hood too, but I think I prefer Captain Blood in a way. It's kind of Korngold meshing his operatic Viennese style that just fits somehow perfectly into American film music. I don't know. He seems really invested in Captain Blood. I don't know how invested he was as he went on because of his peculiar biography. He was so famous. So I love getting a chance to study this. I watched the movie, which I don't think I've ever watched, or if I did, I didn't, remember it. And I think Errol Flynn's pretty good. It's kind of funny and weird. It doesn't feel like a Hollywood. It feels more like an early 30s movie. There's a lot of cards describing what's going on that are legacies of silent film. It does like Robin Hood already seems like a Hollywood film that we would recognize as a golden age film. Captain Blood seems like sort of an origin story. So I'm really glad to do that, and I'm glad to see how he used all. We're just doing basically the main title, which has a lot of the themes and stuff in it, but it's really interesting in the way that he uses it during the film. And then he interpolates Liszt and other things, which is a silent film thing. Not that they didn't do it later, but it's really a silent film thing at that point to interpolate something like that. But it's done very skillfully and So I'm excited about doing that.
Now that's a stunning score. It's the kind of whenever you're talking about the interpolation, the way the theme throughout the film, it's kind of the horn chord, isn't it? It's the da 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 da, da. Beautifully
Yeah,
realized. And and that overture, and we're talking about obviously the concert hall, and what a piece made to start a
yeah,
concert.
yeah,
Fantastic opening.
yeah, yeah. And you can hear Dakota. You can hear all his Viennese sense of harmony and lushness, and yet there's pathos in it. And I mean, imagine Korngold's life in the 30s. We have to imagine like the late 20s and 30s, what's going on in America. That this is the DNA of movies, is this horribly painful time in America, and then these movies that are just gloriously uh, looking forward and fun, and the good guy wins, and optimistic, basically. And I guess they're pretty inexpensive, and Korngold's leaving under this horrible thing that's happening in Europe. And I'm sure he wouldn't have ever come if it wasn't for that. But thank God for us, because him in the soup with Alfred Newman and Waxman and Tompkin and the rest of them really stirred the pot, and making that style that lasted for 20 years before it kind of collapsed. Anyway, I'm talking too much, so yeah.
No, but
Not at all. It's all good.
it's always fascinating to hear you talking, Dave, because you have this great sense of perspective and historical perspective on the evolution of film music. And what you said made me think about how much this repertoire hasn't been performed very much. I mean, Korngold's music hasn't been that much performed even in LA by the LA Phil. So these are kind of firsts in many ways. And this is where I want to bring in Tim Grieving, because Tim, a few months ago, you wrote a great long-form piece for the Alta online magazine, where you kind of trace back the history of the last 20 years in Los Angeles when it comes to film music performance. You also speak with John Williams about this, and it's fascinating to see how things changed throughout the course of just 20 years, which is not a long time, but it's long enough to have a sense of trajectory in many ways. So given also your position as a prime film music journalist in Los Angeles, how do you see how much the landscape changed according to your own experience?
It's changed dramatically just in the last, I think, 15, 20 years. I mean, the fact that like the New York Philharmonic, Vienna, Berlin, these kinds of places are embracing film music as part of their programming without putting an asterisk next to it and kind of holding their nose. I mean, I think there's still a little bit of that, but it's been I mean, Dave can attest to this, and Dave is part of the driving force for this, but it has been a dramatic shift in not just seeing and hearing film music programmed more consistently across the US and across the world, including major kind of traditionally very snobby orchestras, but just the general attitude about it. You have high level music directors like Gustavo Dudamel and people like him really championing this kind of music. So, and from my perspective as a journalist, just getting stories about film music kind of out in mainstream places is not an uphill battle so much. So it's been a relatively recent, I think, sea change and just a cultural attitude about this music and a cultural awareness of it, an excitement about it. Obviously, it's doing gangbusters for selling tickets and bringing in younger audiences to these concerts. So I mean, Dave has a longer view of this, but it really seems like a dramatic kind of windfall in just that short period of time.
Things happen so slow in organizations like these. Remember, they're generally close to 100 years or older than 100 years old, and it just takes a long. Mahler never used to be in the canon, and it took till the 50s and 60s, and most famously with Bernstein. And that movie Maestro sort of alludes to this. I think something else, Tim, that you referenced in your article, I think it was a quote of John talking about the musicians, or just generally seeing how film music goes from the beginning of a film to the end, that you hear the whole thing rather than just the theme or something. And John said that was a really important thing, that these musicians start hearing when they do the whole film. They don't just hear the themes, they hear how the themes are used, they hear how it affects the story, and they're not just doing it one time. There's a couple of rehearsals, 2 or 3 performances, and they're doing this maybe 2 to 4 times a year, depending on the orchestra, for 10 years, 15 years, and they start to understand what it is just by simply playing it. And this has never, ever happened because it doesn't really fit into their model. Their model is playing concert music for a live audience, but it's now morphed into this other model where the technology made it so easy that you could do it. So I'm just speaking sort of to Tim's point that the last 15 years have been hugely moving forward in this aspect, and also being able to look at it as an art form, and kind of, maybe not by talking to them, but you just sort of by osmosis understand what the art of it is. There are all kinds of, you can hierarchy, art per se, but anything can be artful if it really is artful, and there's a minuscule amount of it, even film music, that is good, that we really want to hear, but there's so much of it that's good because there's been so much of it written, the same as classical music. And to just the last point is that I think the whole concept of being snobby is as much as all of us are kind of snobby, is really an anathema to Hollywood in general, because you just never, if you work in Hollywood, everything is so chaotic, and something that seems to be kitschy and terrible turns out to be incredible, and something you think is incredibly artful and high art turns out to be crap. So I think our little DNA and our little world here in LA and Los Angeles doesn't like the snobby part of the kind of DNA of most arts organizations that are 100 years old. So it's an interesting concept. Anyway.
No, but actually, what you just said makes me think about how John Williams himself was truly a trailblazer in that regard back in the 1980s when he accepted the post at the Boston Pops. And of course, this is very much common known story, but I mean, it was a gamble for him in many ways to go to such an institution and to be so greatly exposed also to a public audience, to a set of people, to a set of audiences that were very strict in terms of what they were expecting. And slowly but steadily, he started to bring in film music into the traditional format of the Pops program, which is a different kind of programming than the standard symphonic repertoire, as we know. But slowly and steadily, he did that and made people accepting film music as part of the vernacular of symphonic music written in the 20th century.
Very much so. And one of the key things which I loved in Tim's article is as well, near the end of the paragraph, you talk about, Dudamel, or the Dude apparently is referred to. Is that right? I didn't know that.
Not by me, but by some.
Big Lebowski flashback. But yes, I mean, it's a very valid point. Of course, he is flying the nest of LA, as you rightly highlight, and going to New York Philharmonic. And I guess for New York, obviously, that's going to be hopefully an embarrassment of riches, because I'm guessing he's going to bring that love of film to New York. I mean, Dave and Tim, do you agree with that?
I hope so. I think Dave's already kind of cracked the seal on that, because he's done West Side Story, and
True,
I flew out to New York to hear Return of the Jedi with the New York Philharmonic, with Dave conducting, and they have this whole art of the score series, and
they do a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's not a totally uphill battle at this point in their history, but I think Dudamel is such a passionate fan of John Williams in particular, and of other great film music, that I think I'm interested to see how he starts to bring that in there.
Yeah. I think they
Yeah,
actually
absolutely.
do more. They do more there than they do. I mean, LA has the Bowl. You know, none of these other well, Boston has Tanglewood, and they do films there sometimes. But and LA does most of their film stuff at the Bowl. They're just sort of starting to do it at Disney Hall. They have issues because of the festival seating that they can't. There's like 700 tickets that they can't sell, so it greatly reduces the size of the hall. So it makes it financially harder to do. But New York is always they've always been doing it. There's a rabid audience in New York for film music. I mean, of all the places I've been, I mean, the bowl is still probably, just because of the nature of what it is. And the John Williams night at the Hollywood Bowl, there's nothing in the world like that. I mean, it's completely insane, you know. But New York Phil and Chicago Symphony has a big series.
Yeah, the Friday
They
Night
all do.
Chicago
If you
Symphony.
if you
Yeah.
Google, I don't know if somebody, Tim, has done this, has made a database of all the film concerts that are going on. I remember there was somebody that used to do it, but there's
Yes.
literally, do you,
Movies in
Tim, know?
Concert. Movies in Concert.nl. It's this chap from Sweden called Flip, who's very passionate. And yes, this website, he creates all of the listings worldwide for every film music
Yeah.
concert. And yes,
And
it's
it's gigantic, right? I mean,
yeah, it's
it's
huge.
mind
Yeah.
blowing.
Hmm.
Yeah. So it's really turned a corner. I hope it's only in its infancy. And I know Tim and we've discussed this a little bit to kind of widen the net a bit, and not, it does sell really well, but it would be nice to be able to widen the net, do a little more obscure stuff. They might have to market a little bit more. They might have to hire somebody that knows how to build an audience for this stuff as an adjunct to what they do. I'm hoping that that will happen, because there's a lot of music that does not get played that should be played, that we all of course as aficionados or collectors know about.
This program, the Golden Age angle to this program is very unique, certainly to all of you. There's very little Golden Age film music that gets programmed over here in the UK and Ireland. I can tell you that. I mean, apart from the odd film music in concert, there might be, the odd Psycho or there's Vertigo live to picture, but this program that you're part of, and that, as you say, John Williams has devised, is really quite dynamic in its concept.
Yeah, and I also think that, to pick up on a thing that you mentioned, Dave, about, to widen the net of the great pieces that are, maybe it's not the big issue is that a lot of those pieces aren't really readily available to perform, because there is still a lot of work to do in terms of getting the score properly prepared and re-engraved. So how much of that work is there is to do to be, I mean, is it a daunting task in many ways, or is there already a wide repertoire available to perform for orchestras?
It's a terribly daunting task. I mean, the issue with film music is availability of materials for a researcher, a journalist, a scholar. And then for a performer, it's how do you even go about, you see what if you want to do the music from The Night of the Hunter? What's that? William Schumann, that great score for the Robert Mitchum movie. There's that scene where she's dead under the water and it's all, this weird waltz. If you want to do that and you're like somebody in Belfast or in Asia or somewhere, how do you even go about doing that? When I was working, I was hoping the Academy Library would do something like this. It would be great if there was somebody that had a bully pulpit, so to speak, like the Academy could have, to kind of try to get this going in some way that made sense. And maybe that will happen. Again, everything moves at a snail's pace. We'd all like it to move faster, but it's a horrible problem. And then here's the other problem, and Tim and I have talked about this a lot. You can't really tell what music is doing until you take it away. Remember, Tim, John was saying last week about the Gene Kelly thing and about Salinger, the orchestrator that
Conrad Salinger.
Yeah, because John loves him. He thinks he's the greatest of the orchestrator arrangers in Hollywood. And he talked about, look at the film of Gene Kelly dancing without the music, and then put the music back in. And even though, yes, he's, it's in a way not a fair thing to do because nobody dances without music. But he said it makes him look light. What did he say to him? Like light and elegant. And do you remember what he said?
I don't remember exactly. Something like that. Just how much the music actually is making that scene come alive and work.
Right. And you don't notice it when it's there, but you take it away and you watch it, and then you put it back, and then you notice what it does. And if you wanted to say what is the art of film music, aside from making compelling music and pretty melodies, much of what film music is doing is that. I think that's a great example and an easy one to comprehend. Gene Kelly looks kind of boxy maybe and not elegant. You put the music in and it's like he's floating, and you don't, is it the orchestration? Is it the changes in harmony? And this would be the thing to study. It's like, what is it, if you were a scholar or what is going on with that to make that? I mean, John said some great things at that. I think it was filmed, wasn't it, Tim? I think Stephen. Yeah, it's everybody should watch what he said at that place. It was spot on what he said about what all of us that do this think about this, about the space, the stages in Hollywood, the people that came before, how much of a siren call film music is, how much we love it, and devoting a life to it, how great, satisfying it is, etc. He just encapsulated it in about a 10-minute speech. It was fantastic.
But what you're highlighting, Dave, is that there's kind of this like education gap in the public, and with, I think, classical organizations too. Neither really understands what film music is, its history, what it's contributing, which John has made an effort to provide that with the pops. I know he, like, on your program, there's the Scherzo for Motorcycle and Orchestra, which he famously does that without music. They screen the sequence, or they screen the opening train sequence from Last Crusade. Maybe that's more frequent, and then he'll play the music with the scene and shows the audience, which I'm sure it's just as educational for the musicians in most of these cases too. But people don't understand. They still don't understand. I mean, because I teach film music history, I understand this just on the ground level of like young 18 to 22-year-olds. They don't, even though they hear film music all the time, every day, they don't understand what it is, how important it is, what goes into it. So it almost feels like we need to like prepare the ground for these like ideal concerts that we want to have by educating everybody, not, on all sides of the equation, what film music is.
That's absolutely true.
That's a great point, Tim, because, and again, we're talking about materials. How do you do that? When I'm doing a film, I get all the tracks separate, so I can just mute the music. So I could show, I mean, were it allowed, you could show, I think we talked about this, Tim, the beginning of E.T. without the music and with the music. You can mute it, show it, unmute it, show it, talk about it, mute it, show, in an educational situation. And I think a couple of years before the pandemic, I did a concert, with John at the Bowl where I, did the first half, and Spielberg was there, and they did that, Tim. They did the opening of that's the third one,
Last
right?
Crusade.
Yeah. And Stephen kind of sat there and sort of, I wouldn't say he made fun of it, but he kind of, because I know he's looking at it and going, it feels so slow. Everything feels so slow, and he was, making fun of it. And then John played the cue. So you get some of the sense of what it is. But again, that's a very rarefied occasion. That's, maybe you'll see one concert like that. It would just be great to be able, and there's certainly the technology for this, for film students or serious scholars or people writing serious people that are studying this, to be able to do this and speak about this. It's like, why does he call it Scherzo for Motorcycle and Orchestra? Like, even that question is almost every movie John does. He does what he calls like a vaudeville like a fun. And
Yeah.
it would be. I've never heard him like explain exactly why he does that. Is he looking that it's will be good in concert, or is it how does it fit into the whole thing?
I think
Even that
that's
is fun.
yeah, I think that's because I think that changed quite dramatically when he after he accepted the Boston Pops post, when he had
Yeah.
that platform where he was allowed to to present his own music in a concert setting. And so he started to extend a little bit some of the pieces and adding maybe a little bit, maybe a couple of bars here or there to give them a more proper concert like form. And in that regard, how much do you think, Dave, film music should be or must be repurposed to be presented properly
Yeah.
on the concert
I,
stage?
I'm an originalist. I would just prefer to hear it the way it was written. Yeah. Okay. So like we're doing the hunt, the hunt scene from Planet of the Apes. We're gonna start with Batman, the second half. And Batman, the original score of Batman has 8 horns, 6 trumpets, 6 trombones, and 2 tubas. And the
Wow.
reason it has that, right, is if you think of the Batman theme as a marching band. It's like okay, so a marching band has a million and 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 so we're doing that, right? And then we're going to do Close Encounters, which is sort of an amalgamation of arrangement because it's very it's one of John's really modernistic scores. There are a lot of other modernist, if you think of Images, if you think of some of the Altman stuff he did, there's more, there's a lot in the past. John Williams existed before Jaws and Star Wars. It's just nobody, very few
Very
things are
few.
played. And then like the hunt is what's in the movie, except it doesn't have a good ending. So okay, so if you have to do a little bit to make an ending or something, I'm okay with that. But again, that's just my opinion. And this is not 1980 either. We're now 2024, where John has like slogged his way almost by himself this into existence. I really, it's so weird because there's one person that did this. He's the right person with the right director at the right time in the right place to do this, and he did it. It selflessly, I think, in a way, because when you hear him talk about this, that Tim and I heard um, at this dedication, you can tell he loves this. This is important to him. This legacy is important, and so I'm on the fence. I can certainly see the other side of it. I'm not dogmatic about it. It's just my inclination would be to do. That's why I like doing the whole movies, akin to what John, in a sense, was saying, because I think it shows the musicians who are the first line of trying to convince them that this is worth it. And then it hasn't really worked its way up into the admin in as much as it is in the orchestras in these organizations. It needs to filter up
Filter up.
to the
Yes.
top. So anyway.
But no, but that's quite interesting actually, Dave, because this reminds me about another great experiment, we should say, that you made last year, I think, in San Diego, where you performed the 2 cues from John Williams' score from The Accidental Tourist, which isn't a score that is often performed, and actually is one of my own personal favorite, actually. And you performed the whole finale cue and the end credits
Yeah.
as pure
Yeah.
music without the movie. So you just
it
play
probably
the
would have
piece.
been it probably would have been better with the movie. I tried to explain it I don't know how successful I think I talked for almost 6 minutes because I thought it was not comprehensible, and I think it's one of his finest scores. I think it is a very compressed kind of composerly formalized way of scoring a film. I thought that the end cue is the only cue that flowers and develops. And then what's so interesting is the end title. It's like the movie's continuing. It's the end. The end title is joyous, but it's young. It's a little, he's melted. He is with this girl. This tragedy he's gone on a little bit the other side, but it's like he's like an adolescent. He's just starting his life again. So all this stuff, pain's going to happen. To who knows what's going to happen. So, but it's joyous because and I think all that's told with the end title, and of course it bookends with those little. I just love that piece. Yeah, and I'm going to do a concert in San Diego again. I've been actually talking to Tim a little bit about it. I'm trying to find what to do. They want to do this again. They want to do a John Williams concert where we maybe do something that hasn't been done. Maybe we can do 7 to 10 minutes of something, and then
Wow.
and then do all the hits.
Right.
But so I'm trying to figure out, so anybody that has, Tim sent me some ideas. Anybody that has any ideas, let me know. So
yeah, well, I think that we all three have quite a long list of pieces that we'd love to hear performed live as pure music, because that's the other thing. It's wonderful to present these cues as pure music because they are just wonderful. And I'm also thinking about something from AI, which is another score that I think all of us love very much. And but also, I don't know, even the end title from Space Camp, which is a minor movie from the 80s, but it has a fantastic, brilliant piece for the end credits that it would be a wonderful capper for any symphonic concerts.
I mean, it's great. They really took to this. It sold really well. I got a lot of nice feedback, not always on my talk, but and they're going to do it again. And this is something I think, and they want it to be a premiere. They want to pay for it. They want it to be their own. This is what they're giving to their audience in San Diego. And why not in, San Francisco or in St. Louis or in, Belfast or in, these are the kinds of things I think hopefully will, when I say widen the net, I mean, okay, so we're doing it with John, which I don't know how much his net needs to be widened, but I think that's a positive. It's a positive thing.
Well, I was there at San Diego, and it was brilliant. I mean, the music itself was brilliant. Hearing something that is very rare, although I'm familiar with it because I adore that score, but hearing that live was incredible. And whether 6 minutes was too long, I thought your introductory remarks were so insightful. You kind of set the audience up with, here's what's happened in this story up till now. Here's here how John Williams has built the score until now, and here's what you're about to experience.
Yeah.
And that's the education part that I love it when you conducted the bowl. It's not just that you're a great conductor, but you're so passionate about this art form. You're so knowledgeable and insightful about this art form. You have such a deep reading of these scores and these films that you can provide this education, and it doesn't feel dry. And it reminds me of Bernstein. He was such a great educator and evangelist for classical music. He conveyed not just to children but to all audiences.
Yeah.
Here's what's happening here, giving you the clues as to what to listen to in the music. Listen for. Here's what the composer was doing. Why this piece mattered so much to the composer. That's what you're doing for film music, and that's, I think, that's the bridge that we need to cross to get people prepared so they can actually hear and appreciate the music. And you say we don't need to cast the net wider for John. In a way, you're right, but The Accidental Tourist is a case in point of the repertoire that is completely untouched, that people only know Superman and Star Wars and just the themes, but they don't know these beautiful masterworks of spanning decades. So if you just started with John Williams and made that your kind of educational project, it would take decades to achieve, probably.
I tried for years, to get Accidental Tourist on one of the bowl concerts. I don't think he likes the score all that much. I
think he did it once in Japan with the Boston Pops.
I think he did it a couple of times with the Pops. It was I think a concert arrangement of the main theme.
Yeah, it was like, it wasn't this cute. It was just the theme,
Yes.
And I mean, the theme's interesting, but it's what he does with the theme at the end of the movie, and it's so easy to, this guy's completely dead inside, and then he wakes up, and John does this and there's hardly any dialogue. It's just
It's beautiful.
modulate. It's doing all these things that it never did. It never modulated. It was the same thing. It was just stuck over and over and over this theme. And then, so I love it. It's very nice of you to say, Tim. I do love it. And I wish for educators like yourself and journalists that all this stuff, these materials were available. It's kind of embarrassing that our community, and particularly the Academy, which has the money to do this, does not take this as seriously as it should be taken. They have a lot of stuff at that library. They have a lot of people working there, and there would be lots and lots of people, probably some of your students, that would love to intern or work at the Academy Library and help putting this stuff together and finding it and putting it in engraving it in these computer programs where it's never going to get lost. It's going to be digital. So I don't know what to do about that. I tried for 3 years, but I got nowhere with it. So
yeah.
Well, did you talk to Warren Shirk? Were you speaking?
Yeah,
with Warren
Shirk? It's just there's just so much to do. They're just you have to be a good politician. You'd have to get you'd have to get funding. You'd have to get some outside funding, and then they put in some funding, and you'd have to have a really cogent plan as to what to do. And then there would have to be a committee of people like Tim and Burlingame and maybe yourself, a bunch of people that was like a board, and like it's a whole thing.
Yeah.
But it doesn't mean it shouldn't be done, and that would help solve the problem, and maybe it will get done in the future. I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah. As you said, there's so much to do, and also even just from the historical perspective of taking these scores and studying them and understand even the beauty of something like the performance aspect that is usually tied within what the people remember from these scores. And this is something not usually discussed because now we have the luck of have many of those recordings available and nicely restored by people like Mike Matessino. And I think it's key to understand how much that side of things, how this music was originally recorded and performed, is crucial to understand how it also informed the music of someone like John Williams, who was there on the stage in the 1950s, hearing the beautiful sound of the 20th Century Fox Orchestra, conducted by your father, Alfred Newman, making these beautiful sounds and absorbing a tradition, an essence that goes way back to the European classical tradition of the 19th century, but it was really continued and being kept alive by first the generation of the Newmans and the Korngolds and the Steiners and so on, and then by the Williamses and the Goldsmiths and today, maybe there aren't many of those today alive, but that's the other reason why it's so important to do these projects of restoration and preserving this history.
Performance is a big deal. It's very hard to do Golden Age recording the way that it was recorded because the particularly the string players don't play like that anymore. And quite frankly, film music is it's morphed into something different, which is I'm not saying that as a pejorative, but it doesn't need playing like that anymore. It's a different sort of thing, and that's a whole nother conversation. It's not really what we're talking about. To recreate Golden Age I can't do anything of my father's the way I would like. It's just impossible. It's so specific to a group of people and a conductor. I just listened to I'd never seen The Count of Monte Cristo, which I think is 35. I think Alfred Newman's not even credited on that movie. The playing on it is it's spectacular, the string playing. And it's even well recorded, even though it's, kind of primitive in a way. But there's so much sliding and it's overwrought to our ears in a way, though of course it blends in perfectly with the movie. The Captain Blood's a little like that too, but Alfred Newman was sort of like, uber like that. So
yes.
It's difficult.
when we were talking about the concert at Disney Hall, you have Wuthering Heights, by your father, which is that beautiful longing theme, which is the essence of good film music, of course. Has beautiful writing for strings. And whenever we talked earlier about AI and the deep cuts of John Williams, of where talking about Accidental Tourist, I remember there was a comment Karen Smith, John Williams' librarian, made to us a few years ago, that whenever John Williams performed AI at the Hollywood Bowl one time, he came off after performing it and said to Karen that I don't think they liked that at all, but everyone was spellbound by it, and for some reason he didn't expect that reaction, which is fascinating. So I suppose it leads to a question for you, Dave, that I'm sure many would be interested to hear, not to put you on the spot, but is there a piece of film music over the years you've conducted in a concert hall where maybe the reaction from the audience has surprised you, or you expected something different? Or I know it's probably a tough question, but just out of interest.
Well, you get sort of addicted to applause. I'm not a huge applause person. I find it a little fascist. I don't know how to, it's my own loony thing. But you do listen to the reaction. Your reaction is applause. So when you don't get applause, you just don't know. And obviously not everything ends with a bang, and
Yes.
it's the thing in Amadeus when Salieri says, you don't even know how to give the Viennese the ending, and he says, "Oh, I should take lessons from you." How to have a bangy ending for applause. So and this is all John's music, and he has to struggle with, we all, even John Williams, you doubt yourself. It's less hard with somebody else's music, but John's always doing, or mostly doing, his own music. But and I don't know when that was. AI. Do you remember? Was that recently?
Well, that would have been, it would be 2003 or 4. It was soon after the film's release.
It's a substantially different world right now than it was then. I think. I don't know. What did he do with it? But AI's been done, right? There's a. Did he do the end title with the vocal? What did he do?
Yes. I think John Williams did once at the ball, just once I think the finale cue that is called the Reunion, which is a big piano solo piece with the strings, and then there's the end credits, which is the same theme but arranged for soprano and orchestra, like a wordless lead, basically.
Yeah. It was a boy soprano, wasn't it, in the film, or was it a girl in the film?
I think
it's a woman.
It's a woman. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
And this is interesting because I think maybe Tim, you can give us some more insight in it, because you had recently a lot of access to John Williams, in the sense that you spoke with him several times for your book project, and I guess this subject, film music in concert, being brought up by him and you as well. What are John Williams' stances on this subject?
Yeah, it's we've spoken about it many times, and I want to be careful not to speak for him, because I'll try to convey it without putting words in his mouth. But it's a complicated issue, and I think he has very complicated feelings about it. I think he obviously, it's been a passionate project for him to present not just his own film music, but the film music that he loves, Bernard Herrmann, Alex North, several others, that was important to him once he had a platform with the Boston Pops to present the best of film music in the setting, in the context of a Pops concert, which, as you pointed out, is a different kind of animal than a traditional symphonic concert in the way that that's structured, which meant that it tended to be leaning towards these kind of concert versions of themes, these kind of anthems or fanfares or waltzes, or sort of fitting a theme from a film into a kind of established Pops,
like a miniature, symphonic miniature. Yes.
So, which made sense. He also was competing with the atmosphere of the Pops, which a lot of people don't understand. These were summer concerts that where they cleared out all the chairs, they put in chairs and tables, and people were loudly eating and drinking during the concert. A lot of the musicians were there under duress. There were older musicians who were forced by their contract to play the music when they really didn't want to be there. They're playing a lot of music, not film music particularly, but kind of the same old standard repertoire they were tired of. So it was a really odd like entry point for him as a conductor to try to present film music. He had to fight with the musicians' apathy and wanting to present things that they would hate playing, and the audience's distraction. And so it kind of it was the right place at the right time because he was writing Star Wars and E.T. and Raiders of the Lost Ark, all the like themes that people knew on the street. These were like pop tunes of the day. Like everybody knew these melodies. So he was the perfect person to do it. And it kind of lent, I mean, his themes lent themselves to let's do the theme from Star Wars or whatever in a kind of pop setting was perfect. But I think he kind of maintained that attitude and that approach. The Hollywood Bowl is similar. The Hollywood Bowl has a kind of similar atmosphere. And you want these kind of uplifting, fun, play the hits kind of thing. So he might fold in something a little more obscure. He usually introduces a theme from his newest film, but he knows that the people want to hear Star Wars, the Imperial March, E.T. And so it kind of I think it kind of hemmed him into this attitude about how to present film music in concert. The way that that's sort of broken out recently is these live to picture programs where you can actually hear all of E.T., all of Jurassic Park, all of Star Wars with the picture, which presents opportunities and challenges. But I don't know that John. I think John is interested in this idea of presenting things as written, or presenting a score in a more long form method without picture. But he's very clear that there's a logistical hurdle, that these scores are either they're in shambles and aren't playable, or it's a bunch of strung together cues that aren't meant to be performed in concert. So they start funny, they end early, and it's hard to know how to piece all that together into a concert form.
Yes, and there are also performances issues, I think, because if you think about something that like the final 20 minutes of Hook, the whole Ultimate War sequence, which features mind-blowing swashbuckling music, I guess it would be very hard to perform live in concert because it plays straight 20 minutes of loud, fast, challenging music.
Yes, but the argument is that he's an arranger himself, and he uses arrangers to make things playable and presentable in a concert. I think all this requires is an arranger to take these scores and build them into a 30-minute suite or something where you're presenting it more as intended for the score, but making it playable for the musicians and making it sort of programmable for an audience. And that, I think that's the next leap. And I think he's open to that, but it's not the way he's thought of film music traditionally. And it's sort of an uncharted territory in a lot of ways. So
there's a thing, Tim, I don't know if we ever talked about this. Eddie Powell, the arranger before Herbie Spencer, those guys are. I know for my father, they used to write a theme, and then he would give it to Eddie Powell and say, make it a big theme. And so Eddie Powell would take the theme and kind of do, Tim, what you're talking about, though it was in the movie, it would be like the end of the movie or an end title or something, and kind of expand it into a set piece, because sometimes in a film there is a set piece. So I know John is, as Tim said, is aware. He was an arranger, and he's aware of that, and he's aware of the skill of all that. But there's a big DNA of the whole golden age of arrangers and people writing and expanding and making things more palatable in various situations.
Yeah, absolutely. And also I think it ties to the what I was saying before, the performance aspect. I mean, film music more often than not is written very quickly and is performed when the ink on the page is still wet, and sometimes literally, because especially back in the day when everything was done, by pencil or ink, and it's performed, it put in front of the musician, and they start to play it, and it comes alive, and it's always something so magical to me to understand how everything works, because out of something very specific and very sometimes even the artistic decision are made out of a very specific necessity of what works with the images and with the other sound components of the film, but then it becomes something else. It becomes art, in my opinion. And to expand on this, I have a very small, very short musical example to play, and it's a cue by Alfred Newman from the movie The Robe, and the cue is called The Map of Jerusalem. I think this is a astonishing example of the quality that was. I mean, this is the 20th Century Fox Orchestra. I didn't specify before introducing the piece, and it was Alfred Newman conducting. And this ties back to what we were saying before about the importance of the performance aspect. So, how challenging it would be to perform this kind of cue in a concert today, Dave? Would you be happy to conduct it in any way?
That cue is really called Diana's Farewell. It starts with this map of Jerusalem. It's the love scene, basically. The major minor thing. I've done this before. This actually sounds pretty good. I mean, you can hear all the rubato in the phrasing. You can hear the violins sound like they never take any breath. It's one big long line. They always know where they're going. So all these are really difficult to get orchestras to do. Also, in Alfred Newman's style, there's Bernard Herrmann made a joke about it. There are always counter melodies. There's the main melody, and then there's the counter melody that weaves in and out of it, and it's sort of an unusual thing. And he would pay more attention to the counter melody almost than the melody, almost to the point of distraction. Sometimes I think Bernard Herrmann made some kind of comment that it just, he'd end up spending more time in the counter melody than the melody, and sometimes the counter melody would become the melody, and that, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So, that would be, that we played that at our wedding. We actually, my wife and I, we got married in
Oh,
I didn't know that.
We had a full orchestra at our wedding because we were all buddies, we were all working musicians. It's lovely live. It was in a church. It sounded gorgeous. So, what's harder would be like Song of Bernadette, if you know the little grotto scene, the little scherzo, or anything, the beginning of Bernadette, which is sort of like Parsifal, or Wuthering Heights is virtually impossible. It's like a big, the trouble with Alfred Newman is it's all like chamber music for a big orchestra, which has a certain thing where there's just nothing's ever simple. It's just not simple beat 1, 2, 3, 4, even though it's written that way. The way it's performed is just, there's all this rubato going back, ebbing and flowing. I mean, it is a beautiful piece. It's sort of a good example of 50s Alfred Newman and that orchestra. Also, the sound of the strings, that's CinemaScope. So that has the 4 mag heads, I think, is CinemaScope like had 2 mag tracks on either edge. So it was definitely a step forward with audio recording.
The resolution, yes.
It's not but quite frankly, like I was saying, I was listening to the Count of Monte Cristo in 1935. Most orchestra music sounds how it sounds depending on where you put the microphones. So it's really important where you, and when you have a studio like UA, which is, was probably the best studio in LA, it's gone now, or Fox, and you're there every day for 20 years, you eventually figure out how to set it up. And everybody knows where they're going to sit and how to play and all that. So a lot of it is that. A lot of it is also the violins and bows and cellos and violas and bows. You could get a Stradivarius. The Uber violins instruments are like Stradivarius, which everybody's heard of, but also Guarneri del Jesus. They were affordable for these musicians, and the bows, the French bows. And I cannot tell you what a difference that makes. Having good actual instrument, a brass instrument's a brass instrument. A woodwind instrument they're modern. They don't. You don't want an 18th century brass instrument. Violins are this bizarro, violins, violas, cellos, basses have this bizarro thing that they tend to get better. There are makers that are way better than other makers, and there are millions of them. And there's an historical precedent, and now they're so expensive that the only way you can play them is the orchestra will buy some of them over the years or have them and loan them out, and maybe a soloist can get an instrument from a foundation, but almost nobody can own one of these instruments. I bet a third to a half of these orchestras had these great instruments and bows, and it made a difference, So I think that's why, and this sense of phrasing and rubato and emotion, that we are not in a culture, I think, of hyper emotion in terms of what artist people would call sentimentality. They would say this just sounds overly sentimental.
Yes.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And so you have to combat that, and you can't just have them slide around. It's a mindset. It's the beauty of the sound. It's the vibrato. It's all being together and listening. So anyway, blah blah blah. It's
a very very valid point. I mean, because at the very start of that cue, and what was so noticeable in today's kind of soundscape is that wonderful vibrato from the woodwinds, which you just don't hear. And I mean, and I think the odd exception, and I'm sure you've both seen, I know Mauricio, you have, The Boys in the Boat, where you've got Alexander Desplat, this lovely main title sequence where the music is actually allowed to talk. I was going to ask David, now Alfred Newman sadly passed away before he was able to hear the Charles Gerhardt National Philharmonic classic film score album, which is just so. I mean, it was my introduction, to his music in the 70s. Now that's a very different sound. I mean, this is a very big kind of Kingsway Hall, very big acoustic, almost like a concert hall sound. Do you think your father would have disapproved of that kind of? Was he very much more into the kind of close mic,
I think
dry
he was.
sound? Or?
I know that the few times he conducted at the Bowl, where he conducted the LA Phil, and I think he did a few other things. It was never very satisfying or successful for him. I think he preferred. Remember, he came from a pit orchestra in the 1920s in New York. He was a very successful Broadway conductor. He wasn't a composer at all. He didn't really start composing till he came to Hollywood, and he was very much helped by Salinger and Eddie Powell, and helped him learn how to compose. So I think he's more of a pit band-ish, expanding out a pit band kind of aesthetic, and chamber music. And I say, okay, so the Cleveland Orchestra under Zell used to talk about this, about Zell used to try to, they were a great orchestra. I mean, they're still a great orchestra, but Zell's aesthetic, George Zell's aesthetic was, chamber music. You chamber music, you play in a certain way. It's very integrated with all the lines that are going on. It's not soloist here, soloist there. Then it's a very integrated, or for want of a better word, it has a sense of intimacy in it. It's not a big broad thing. Not all Alfred Newman's like this, of course, but these pretty dialogue dramatic movies are this. There's a lot of solo playing. There's a lot of high cello. There's a lot of where the bottom is not cellos, it's basses. So the cellos are way up in tenor, and the basses are the bottom, maybe with trombones or other things to do it. And so it's sort of height. I don't want to get into the weeds, but it's a very odd way of orchestrating Alfred Newman that I haven't seen. Steiner doesn't do that. Chomkin doesn't do that. Obviously, Korngold doesn't. Maybe Bernard Herrmann do, but Bernard Herrmann's so much more modern than my father. But I think his sense was this kind of chamber music buzzing, ebb and flow. Like it even when it's straight, the melody's going, you can hear the strings holding back on a certain beat, but it doesn't sound like they stop. It's like and in other words, think of, he would say, and this is all I'll say about it. Jascha Heifetz and Georg Paderewski were the famous soloists of the day. Violin, Heifetz, Paderewski. He said if he could have had an entire orchestra of Heifetz and Paderewski, that's what he would have done. So that gives you an idea. It's all soloistic playing, but chamber soloistic playing, blending and everything. So a soloist is never going to phone it in, ever. And this is the thing that everybody combats with an orchestra, is they just want to go to the lowest. It's not that they want to. It's always the lowest common denominator. It's the slowest person, the person that is a little bit behind the beat. Everybody gravitates towards them because it's the only way to stay together. And Alfred Newman, that would drive him insane. You just get tossed out if you do that, until you have the group that you want and they will do what you want. But then you go do the LA Phil or do somebody else, and they don't know what you're talking about. So that's a little bit of a long Mauricio of saying that, but I think it's an odd style that isn't really, there's nothing in common, I don't think, with any of the others. Though it was the same orchestra, it doesn't sound all that different, but it is really profoundly different, I think, his stuff. Therefore, I find it mostly very unsatisfying, unless it's like Captain Castile or How the West Was Won, or any of the jazz things would sound great. That street scene sounds great in concert. Stuff like that is fine.
Yeah, but the reason why,
brilliant.
yeah, this is so fascinating, and this is the kind of insight that I like to share with people listening to this, because I think it's so key. Also, and it ties to John Williams as well, because I think he has always been one of the composers in Hollywood who was so key in terms of achieving a certain kind of level of performance in his scores. I mean, even I'm thinking about all the instances where he had some great solo writing in some of his scores. I mean, I've talked with many of his LA musicians that played for him for many years in the orchestras, and many of them did have to be up to the challenge to perform his music, because it wasn't the easiest stuff to have on the music stand.
Yeah, it's not easy. John's a really great orchestrator, and my take on John's aesthetic is he thinks from the beginning orchestrally. So what that means is he wants everything to sound good. Okay, so the example is like Brahms. You can tell like Brahms is composing on a piano. He's just composing music. He's not really all that interested in who's going to play the music till later. Now, this isn't always the case, but like Stravinsky would be the absolute opposite. He would only think of the color. He would think of the color alongside the music itself. So Alfred Newman's stuff isn't really orchestrated to be kind of foolproof. John's music is almost foolproof. Like when you sit there on I was playing ET, it just sounds good immediately. Now, of course, it's hard, and it's not that you don't make mistakes and blah, 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 but it's so expertly orchestrated from the get-go. That's the aesthetic, Now, you might compare that to Goldsmith, who is not like that. So Goldsmith took a bit of, it just wasn't as clear, like what line should be up and down, and this doubling, how does this balance, and all the intricacies of you guys have all been to sessions. You can hear what they're, well, at least sessions 20 years ago, you can hear what they're taught, can this be a little softer? Can that be a little loud? John's just was always, I mean, I played on a few, maybe 4 or 5 films. And yeah. So sitting there can really tell. It just pops. Everything sounds great. And then, then it's getting the performance and, doing all that stuff. But not every film composer is like that. Some of them are harder to make sound good than others. Like Korngold, you'd think is a really great orchestrator, but it's hard to make it sound good. It's so thick and there's so much going on that you have to make some choices about what's happening. Tiomkin's another one that's really hard to make sound good, because it's this just mass of, the way he composed it is like a mass of orchestra that he would then tacit instruments as he listened. It wasn't really thought of like is a finished orchestral piece. It was kind of made up as it went, if that makes sense. Anyway, that's my experience. That was my experience with that Telarc album in the 80s. Was, I got all the Tiomkin scores for It's a Wonderful Life, and I wasn't experienced enough to freaking know this. And so it was just a mess to try to figure it out, which we did eventually, but, because you have the soundtrack to relate it to. But anyway, I feel like I'm talking too much. So
no, but it's
good content.
It's absolutely fascinating, David, to hear you talk about this stuff, because I mean, this is really the meat and potatoes of what makes film music repertoire really worth exploring, because there's so much to go through, especially great film music like the ones that you are going to conduct with the LA Phil. And do you have any specific piece that you are going to perform, you're going to conduct, that is particularly dear for you? in the
Well,
program?
Spartacus is one of my favorite scores. Yeah, I'd love to do Spartacus is a live movie, but of course it's a weird movie. I mean, it's got a lot of great things and it's got a lot of bizarre things, but the score is just like, and what is it, 3 hours? It's over 3 hours, I think.
Yeah, I think it's
Again, so somebody up in the administration would have to say it's worth it. It's worth the overtime. It's worth the rehearsal. The orchestra is probably 120 people, so it's worth adding 30 people. But if I had my druthers, if I was working at an orchestra, I would absolutely program Spartacus, because I think it's one of the most important scores of the 20th century. It's a score in the middle of modernism and golden age, and it has that one of the greatest love themes of all time. It has the most pathos and beauty, and it really is almost my favorite theme like that in all of the literature. So and I'm going to do I do like Once Upon a Time in the West of Morricone. I'm not a Morricone fanatic like many are, but I do love that scene at the beginning of Once Upon a Time in the West. I think that is, as the camera goes over,
magical.
And my daughter Diana Newman is going to sing the thing, and it's right in her wheelhouse because it's high, and she has a beautiful high soprano voice. So I've never, well, actually I did that in Vienna once, but and I'm excited to do Tom's thing too. The piece from 1970. I think Tom has a lot of music that could be. It needs to be arranged a little bit, to your point, Tim. Like stuff like that, like Elfman's, some of say Hans's stuff or that kind of stuff works really well, but it needs to be figured out because there's so much electronics. But it's easy to figure it out. There's your whole class, Tim, or a class at a university could figure it out. They could engrave it, take it down and do the whole thing. There's plenty of people to do this. It's just money. So
there's some great orchestrators out there who could be able to arrange properly for symphony orchestra. And it's interesting that you mentioned that piece by Thomas Newman from 1917. It's because it's the only piece in the program that is fairly recent, because all the rest is quite old in the sense that it seems that there's some kind of a gap at some point in Hollywood film music where the more traditional orchestral symphonic, let's call it this way, repertoire has gone more, it has become a kind of a thing of the past. Of course, there are still great orchestral film score being written as we speak, basically, but it seems like it's something that belongs more in the past than it is part of our.
But these are they're solvable problems. I mean, there are a lot of look. What percentage of scores deserve being played in concert? What would, like, 0.1%, or and it's like, what percent of classical music is played? Like 0.0001% for the last 300 years. You just have to find the right stuff, and but none of these are, they used to be daunting issues. None of this is a daunting issue now. There's enough technology, there's enough people that are trained enough to do this, to do anything. It's just a matter of getting the materials and having the will to do it and a reason to do it. There should be a film concert of the films of 2020 or 20, I don't know. I always thought there should be an Academy Awards concert of all the 5 nominated scores. I think they tried it once, but it was probably silly. It should be something really serious, and with people like Tim interviewing them, and getting into the weeds of what it is. Like Tim is saying, using it as an education as to why are these films nominated? What about them are interesting, because they're nominated by musicians supposedly in the branch, until they get, so the 5 films that are nominated are not nominated by the general public. They're nominated by their peers. So what about them are interesting? So I don't know. We did a concert. Maybe we can end with this, because I probably need to go in a sec. But In 1989, when I was working at Sundance, we did a film music concert. I don't know if you guys know about it. Tim, you know about it, right? The one we did at Royce Hall. That's where I did the main title of Spartacus with film. We did it, and Alex was there. Alex North was there. It was right before he died, and we didn't know if he was going to come, and he came. And at the end, nobody knew he was there. And at the end, he stood up, and the audience, and it was like A list. It was all the big directors and Spielberg and Redford and Mancini conducted, and Maurice Jarre conducted, and George Delarue conducted. It was like an Academy Award film music concert. That's what an Academy Award. If you're going to do it, that's what it should be done. Or like do a really in-depth with seminars or stuff thing like Tim would curate or something of the scores. The 5 scores. But it's expensive and it's difficult, and no one really even gives it a thought, really. So we'll see. These movies now do sell tickets in live events, so it's hard to ignore it. As much as a lot of the marketing departments and orchestras would like to ignore it, they can't really ignore it. So we'll see where it all goes. But
well, these concerts on the 2nd, the 3rd, and the 4th, it's great that you have 3 dates. That's tremendous. And then you've got Superman. You were alluding earlier to the fact of playing the whole, score to the film. I mean, that's
Superman
that's
and Jurassic Park. Yeah,
brilliant. Yes, and Jurassic Park. They're in March, I think, aren't they? So
Dudamel did E.T. and he's going to do Jurassic Park, which is a bitch to do. Sorry, it's so hard. And then I think Tom Wilkinson is going to do, who's does a lot of conducting, does the Hollywood Bowl Orchestra. He's going to do Superman, which is terrific score.
Oh God, yeah. I mean, that's golden.
Yeah. So anyway, it's fingers crossed. And if anybody has maybe I should do the end of Hook. Has anyone ever done that to you? Or maybe 10 minutes of that?
There's a truncated one that you guys remember that Conzel did. They're a very truncated Ultimate War, but it's about 5 minutes.
Yeah, I think it was a takedown. I think it's not like the full thing.
Definitely, yes. And Williams hates takedowns, as you
all right, know. Well, I can't. Tim send me a bunch of stuff. Just and I think you reminded me again, Tim. So send me what you want to do. I'd like to. I'm going to try to figure it out next month. I have another month to think about it.
We keep the channel open, I think, and we can exchange a few ideas.
Maybe even some of your listeners can send you notes and send them along. I'm open to whatever. It just has to have never been done. It needs to be a premiere.
Yeah.
So
that's absolutely a great promise, a great look towards to what the future can hold. And I really want to thank you, Dave, for being so open and so going so in depth about this subject, because it's really what for me film music is about, and the appreciation of film music is about, is having people understand better what makes this repertoire worth of being discussed and performed and listened and studied, because there's so much work to do, and I'm so happy that film music has a great ambassador like you, and also Tim as well, throughout his work as a connoisseur.
Definitely. Well, that's the thing. It's like going to the cinema as well, isn't it, gents? You have to experience it with people, and it's the same with music. Experiencing this music we all love with an audience is second to none. It's so special. So thank you for flying the flag, as they say.
Yeah, no, I mean, and thank you guys for doing this. And Tim is, as well as, journalist, thank you for being an educator and taking all the time to go and slog through with that age group, which can be, I know, sometimes a little daunting, because it's the way these films are edited, and it's hard for that age group that's grown up on social media and TikTok and stuff to do it. It needs people that'll really take them through it. So I appreciate that, Tim, that you do that you take your time to do that as well. So, and you guys to do this is great. And
Thank
thanks
you.
for having me.
Thank you. Thank you, Dave.
right.
You have been a
See you.
wonderful guest.
Thanks so much.
Thank you
Dave.
so much.
Appreciate
Thank you,
it. All
Tim.
the best.
Thank you, Tim.
My pleasure.
Thank you, Tim G. Yes. Look, can't wait to read your book. It's eagerly awaited. 2026, is that right?
We'll see. Something like that.
Okay.
Tim, let's go for 2025.
I'll try.
Okay, good. Okay, good.
Thank
Bye,
you,
guys.
everyone.
So much.
Thank you.